In the autumn of 1913, Carl Jung stood on the precipice of something no psychologist had ever dared to map: the abyss of the soul. It was a time of turbulence, both within Jung and throughout Europe. Outwardly, he was still a respected scientist, but inwardly, something had snapped. The rupture with Freud that year had not merely severed a professional bond, it had unlocked a door deep within his psyche. It began with a vision. On October 17th, 1913, as Jung was riding a train through the countryside, he was overcome by a terrifying image: a great flood sweeping across Europe, submerging all the land between the North Sea and the Alps. He watched as civilization drowned, and then out of the swirling depths arose a sea of blood. This vision haunted him, and then it repeated. Only later did he realize that what he had seen wasn't madness, but prophecy. The First World War would break out 10 months later. In his Red Book, Jung reflects, "I had the feeling that I was underground in the shadows of the past, and that the spirit of the depths had seized me and was leading me down. The walls of the conscious mind were cracking, and something vast was rushing in." The Red Book begins, Descent into the Spirit of the Depths. By November of 1913, Jung made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would not resist these images, he would confront them. Each evening, he would enter a quiet, meditative state and invite the visions to come. He called this process active imagination, but what it unleashed was not imagined. It was a full descent into the mythic depths of his soul. In the Red Book, Jung describes the moment he surrendered to the spirit of the depths. The spirit of the times wanted to hear of use and value. I, however, wanted to hear of being itself. And so he descended. The first vision recorded in the Red Book is of a desert landscape, barren and vast. Jung sees a black serpent slithering toward a figure, an old prophet with a white beard and deep, knowing eyes. This was Elijah, the first of Jung's inner guides. Elijah is accompanied by a dark-eyed, seductive woman named Salome, who declares herself to be blind. This vision would perplex Jung. Why was Elijah, the prophet of truth, accompanied by Salome, the temptress who demanded the head of John the Baptist? And why did she call him father? Symbolically, Jung was witnessing the collision of opposites, light and dark, masculine and feminine, reason and eroticism, within his own soul. He whom Salome calls father is not Elijah, but myself, Jung later writes. This was the beginning of what he would later call the individuation process, the integration of all parts of the self. The murder of the hero, the death of Siegfried. In December of that same year, another vision struck Jung with brutal clarity. He saw himself murdering Siegfried, the Germanic hero. In myth, Siegfried is noble, bold, and nearly invincible. He is the idealized man, but Jung kills him, drives a sword through his body, and watches him fall. This act horrified Jung. Why would his unconscious demand the death of such a heroic figure? The answer would become clear with time. Siegfried represented the inflated ego, the ideal self Jung had to relinquish in order to transform. "I had to kill myself, my ideal," Jung wrote. "It was a sacrifice." Just days after the Siegfried vision, Jung's first daughter fell gravely ill. He felt the synchronicity acutely. The inner world and the outer world were now linked by an invisible bridge, and he was crossing it daily. The Red One, the Trickster Appears. By the beginning of 1914, Jung's inner world began to populate with characters, voices that weren't simply symbolic abstractions, but autonomous psychic figures with will, personality, and power. The most infamous of these was a demonic, flamboyant figure with horns and red wings, the Red One. In the Red Book, Jung describes the Red One as seductive, mocking, brilliant, an embodiment of Luciferian intellect. He tempts Jung to embrace extremes, to abandon morality, to revel in the chaos of freedom and contradiction. But the Red One is not merely evil. He is the shadow of wisdom, without heart, a vision of what Jung himself could become if led only by reason and pride. He is the devil, Jung writes, but also the magician who opens the gates of deeper knowledge. The appearance of the Red One marks a turning point in Jung's journey. He was no longer confronting images. He was now engaging in dialogue with living aspects of the unconscious, and they were challenging him, questioning him, tempting him to abandon his previous understanding of reality. The sacrifice and the cross. In one of the most haunting visions of this period, Jung sees himself crucified on a cross, but the wood is not dead. It is a living tree. Blood seeps down from his wounds and roots itself into the earth. He hears a voice whisper, "This is the sacrifice of renewal. You will not be the same again." This vision is described around Red Book, and it marks the emergence of the Christ archetype in Jung's journey, not as a historical figure, but as a universal symbol of transformation through suffering. To Jung, the crucifixion wasn't about religious doctrine, it was about psychic dismemberment, the breaking apart of the old self to make room for the new. In his vision, the cross is not punishment, it is alchemy. Something must die for something to be reborn. He would later call this process enantiodromia, the transformation into the opposite. The ego must be shattered to make way for the self. Philemon Appears, the wise old man. As Jung continued his inner dialogues, a new figure appeared, one who would become his spiritual guide and mentor throughout the remainder of his visions. Philemon. Philemon appeared as an old man with the wings of a kingfisher, clad in a blue robe, eyes full of ancient knowing. Jung first encountered him in a dream where Philemon was walking in a garden, holding a staff carved with serpents. He said things which I had not consciously thought. He seemed to me quite real, as if he were a living personality. Jung began painting Philemon in his Red Book, and in his Black Books, he records hundreds of conversations with this figure. Philemon represented the deeper wisdom of the unconscious, the logos that speaks from beyond the ego. He offered insights, corrected Jung's misunderstandings, and revealed the limits of rational psychology. Jung never claimed Philemon was just a symbol. To him, Philemon was as real as any external teacher. He called him his guru, his spirit guide, and even believed that Philemon possessed a superior consciousness. This encounter with Philemon marks the entrance into the second half of Jung's life, the life of myth, soul, and archetypal communion. The temptation in the desert. In a desert vision that would later form one of the core narratives in the Red Book, Jung sees himself walking among scorched stones, parched with thirst, when a voice calls out to him, "Drink, but you will pay." A black chalice appears in the sand. Jung drinks and immediately falls into a deep trance. In this trance, he is confronted by hundreds of his former selves, shadow figures, ghosts of his ambitions, disguises he wore in the past. One by one, they accuse him of betrayal. "You became a prophet," one sneers. "You abandoned science," another cries. "You think you speak with God." This is the vision of the false self-tribunal, a confrontation with every identity the ego has constructed. Jung later wrote that this experience was worse than death, because it stripped away every illusion. But it was necessary. To enter the true self, one must first dismantle all the false ones. The cosmic tree and the serpent. In 1916, Jung experiences one of his most alchemical visions. He sees a cosmic tree that grows both upward and downward. Its roots stretch into hell, its branches into the heavens. Wrapped around the trunk is a shining serpent, neither threatening nor benevolent, but eternal. This vision appears in 7 sermons to the dead, which Jung attributed to the Gnostic teacher Basilides of Alexandria. Though written by Jung himself, he claimed it was dictated to him by an ancient spirit. In the sermons, Jung describes Abraxas, a god that contains both good and evil, light and dark. Abraxas is beyond morality. He is the union of all opposites. Abraxas is the god who is difficult to grasp. His power is the greatest because man does not perceive it. This vision revealed a core insight. Individuation is not the pursuit of light, it is the embrace of totality. The serpent and the tree, the sky and the abyss are one. The dead return. It was in early 1916, shortly after Jung completed a series of intense visions and began compiling the 7 sermons to the dead, that something unprecedented happened. He writes that the house was filled with the dead, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. Jung experienced what he believed was a psychic invasion of disembodied spirits. They gathered in his study. He heard voices. The atmosphere was charged with an ancient gravity like the presence of unspoken millennia. He felt compelled to write, not as Carl Jung, but as a vessel. What came forth were the 7 sermons, in which the dead are addressed by Basilides, the ancient Gnostic teacher Jung channeled. The sermons speak of Abraxas, of the dual nature of the divine, and of the terrifying unity of opposites. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung describes this experience not as psychosis, but as a moment of sacred possession, a breaking open of the personal unconscious to allow the collective unconscious to speak. The dead came back from Jerusalem, where they found not what they sought. They begged me to teach them. I began to speak. This moment would confirm Jung's belief that his visions were not personal hallucinations, but part of the psyche's deeper architecture, and that those who ignore the dead, who repress ancestral memory, risk being haunted by the unlived past. The Black Magician and the Serpent Ritual. By 1917, Jung's visions had grown more ritualistic. In one entry from the Black Books, he describes being led down a spiral staircase beneath a ruined cathedral, where he finds a hooded figure preparing a strange rite. This figure, the Black Magician, invites Jung to sit. He then places a serpent on Jung's chest and begins chanting in a language Jung doesn't understand. The serpent slithers up Jung's body and coils around his head. He hears a voice say, "Your reason is no longer king. Now, you must serve the serpent." The vision is drenched in alchemical symbolism, the serpent as kundalini, as libido, as wisdom and danger intertwined. The magician, like Philemon, represents a deeper psychic authority that Jung cannot control, only obey. He later links this vision to the principle of conjunctio, the alchemical marriage of opposites. To enter the self is to lose sovereignty. One must submit to something more ancient, more powerful than the rational mind. The Descent of Salome. Around the same time, Jung's visions of Salome intensified. No longer the passive blind woman he first encountered alongside Elijah, Salome now appears as seductive, commanding, and frighteningly wise. In one vision, she leads Jung down a stairway of mirrors, whispering secrets of desire and death. She shows him a garden of withered roses, telling him, "These are the loves you have denied." Salome is not just a shadow figure, she is the soul, a Naima. And Jung realizes that to truly know himself, he must reconcile with her. He cannot repress his erotic, emotional, intuitive self. He must marry the feminine within. This marriage is not romantic, it is psycho-spiritual, and Salome tells him, "I do not want your worship, I want your honesty." Jung's later theory of anima and animus, of the inner feminine and masculine, emerges directly from these terrifying, intimate visions. The world clock and the end of time. Near the end of the war, Jung experiences a powerful vision of a massive clock suspended over the world. It ticks not seconds, but archetypes. Each turn of the hand unleashes a new mythic age. He watches as the hand moves, and with it, humanity shifts into chaos. He calls it the world clock, a cosmic mechanism that turns regardless of human will. In Psychology and Religion, Jung writes that this symbol came to him with great intensity and fear. He saw it as the instrument of enantiodromia, the inevitable return of the repressed. The descent into hell describes the sinking of the vanished value into the unconscious, where, by conquering the power of darkness, it establishes a new order. The clock reminded him that the psyche has its own timing, its own rhythms. The ego cannot dictate the moment of awakening. The unconscious decides. The Angel in the Garden. A few years after the war had ended, in 1920, Jung described a quiet but haunting vision that came to him while sitting in his garden in Küsnacht. The world around him was still and green, yet within he sensed a presence. Suddenly, he saw an angel descend, neither male nor female, not glowing or winged, but shadowed in blue and gold, its face both beautiful and tragic. The angel did not speak, it simply placed a mirror in front of Jung. And in that mirror, he did not see himself. He saw the world, teeming with suffering, delusion, beauty, ignorance, and mystery. The angel then faded into the earth. Jung would later associate this vision with the self, the archetype of wholeness that cannot be possessed, only glimpsed. The angel was not a messenger of comfort, but a reminder of the weight of consciousness. To see the truth is to carry it. To become aware is to become responsible. The Tower and the Circular Time. In 1923, Jung began constructing his stone tower in Bollingen, a retreat he called a confession in stone. Here, away from modern distractions, he recorded many of his later visions. One recurring image was that of time as a circle. He writes in his personal journals that he dreamt of a serpent devouring its tail, the Ouroboros, spinning within a spiral galaxy. In the dream, he saw his tower crumble and rebuild itself endlessly, as if it were not bound by cause and effect. Each version was slightly different. Each version was also the same. He interpreted this as a confrontation with deep time, what the alchemists called the aion. In his work, Aion, Jung describes how the psyche exists not only in linear time, but in archetypal time, where images return in cycles across generations, as if memory itself is eternal. This was no longer vision for therapy, it was vision as cosmology. The Visit from Philemon and Ka. In the winter of 1924, Jung recorded an intense inner dialogue with Philemon, his old spiritual guide, and a new figure named Ka, the Egyptian concept of the soul double. Philemon appeared, draped in ancient robes, bearing a scroll made of fire. Behind him stood Ka, silent and watching. Jung asked, "What must I still understand?" Philemon responded, "You must learn that death does not end life, it completes it." Ka then stepped forward and placed a seed in Jung's hand. The vision ended there. Jung later interpreted this as a message about psychic continuity, that the psyche extends beyond the ego, and possibly even beyond death. It shaped his later writings on reincarnation, ancestral memory, and the continuity of the soul. Philemon and Ka together represented a fusion, wisdom and life force, spirit and instinct, the vertical and the horizontal threads of existence, stitched together by conscious suffering. The Woman in Black. In a dark moment during 1925, following the deaths of close friends and the decline of his mother, Jung experienced a vision of a woman in black seated beside a black river. She looked like Salome, but older, not wiser, still blind. Jung asked her, "Are you death?" She replied, "I am what you still refuse to become." The river behind her was filled with mirrors instead of water, and in them Jung saw faces, thousands of them people he had never met, yet who seemed to know him. He later described this vision in his 1925 seminar as a turning point. He realized that he had not yet fully integrated the shadow of wisdom, the part of him that feared aging, limitation, and finality. The woman in black was not a threat, but an invitation to let go of striving, to accept the truth that wholeness requires surrender, not achievement. The Red Book closes. By 1930, Jung had stopped actively recording visions in the Red Book, though the material within it would echo throughout the rest of his writings. He claimed that the primary phase of confrontation was complete, but he didn't stop dreaming. He didn't stop descending. He simply shifted the descent into a different form: scholarship, teaching, and integration. In 1930, Jung experienced one final vision related to the Red Book phase. He was in a vast library beneath the sea. All the books were written in fire. He opened one and saw only a single word repeated over and over: self. The flames didn't burn him, they warmed him. And when he awoke, he knew. The self had finally taken root. This wasn't the end of his visionary life, but it was the completion of the first great descent. The abyss had taught him its secrets. Now, he would spend the rest of his life teaching others how to survive their own descent. The Clock of the World. In 1938, Jung published Psychology and Religion, a text shaped by another profound inner vision. This one came to him during a walk near Lake Zurich. He looked up at the clouds and suddenly saw a gigantic clock suspended in the sky, not ticking, but pulsing. It did not measure seconds, but symbols. Each tick unleashed a cascade of images: lions, serpents, burning towers, children born under eclipses. He wrote, "I saw that time is not mechanical. It is alive. It is the bloodstream of the collective soul." In the book, Jung describes this as a symbol of the world clock, a cosmic process wherein psychological and mythological events unfold like planetary alignments, not human schedules. This vision haunted him. He feared we were entering an age of psychic catastrophe where the disconnect between inner and outer time would tear people apart. It was a warning, not from God, but from the self. The Descent of Christ. During World War II, Jung returned to a vision that had troubled him for decades: the descent of Christ into hell. This image, drawn from apocryphal Gospels and deeply embedded in Jung's copy of Albrecht Dieterich's Nekia, took on new meaning during the war. Jung saw this descent not as theology, but as psychological necessity. In his later works, Ion and Psychology and Religion, he interprets it as a model of individuation. The soul must descend into darkness, integrate what is hidden, and redeem even the dead parts of the self. He called this the descensus ad infernos. It was the only way to prevent evil from projecting outward into politics, violence, and genocide. Christ's descent was not triumph, it was transformation. And through this motif, Jung confronted the collective shadow of the West. He knew the war was not just geopolitical, it was archetypal, a psychic convulsion, the result of too many refusing to descend on their own. So the world descended for them. The Black Cabin. In 1950, Jung recounted a strange recurring vision in his final private notebooks: a black wooden cabin in a forest. He was never sure if he was awake or dreaming when it appeared. Inside the cabin was a single chair, a fire burning, and a mirror on every wall. Each mirror showed a different version of him, some younger, some aged, some disfigured, some luminous. But the one commonality? None of them looked back at him. He would later write that this cabin represented the ultimate confrontation with the self, not just the integration of opposites, but the realization that even the integrated self is only a window into something far vaster. The cabin was his tomb, and also his temple. It wasn't frightening, it was silent. Jung would return to this cabin vision every time he felt his ego begin to reassert itself. It was his reminder: you are not the self. You are its servant. The Final Dream. In 1959, 2 years before his death, Jung described a dream that profoundly moved him. He dreamt he was standing at the edge of the universe, and in front of him was a massive, dome-shaped temple, made entirely of crystal. Each tile on the dome was a different archetype. Some he recognized, some he didn't. They shimmered like stained glass. Inside the temple was no altar, no book, no god, only a spiral staircase descending into darkness. He asked, "Is this where it ends?" A voice, neither inside nor outside of him, responded, "No, this is where it begins again." Jung would later reflect that this dream reassured him, not of immortality, but of continuity. He believed the psyche was not destroyed at death, but reabsorbed into the archetypal field. What we call the soul does not vanish. It returns to the symbolic order. And in this final vision, Jung saw not salvation, not judgment, but the endless work of consciousness spiraling on. The light behind the eyes. In June of 1961, just days before his death, Jung experienced what some call his final vision. He was bedridden, weak, and barely conscious. Suddenly, his nurse reported that he opened his eyes, looked toward the ceiling, and began to weep silently. When asked what he saw, he replied, There's so much light. It's everywhere. But it's coming from inside the darkness. He then closed his eyes and did not speak again. This was not a vision of heaven. It was the revelation of paradox, that darkness contains light, and light is born in darkness. It echoed every descent he had ever made, every symbol he had ever studied. Carl Jung did not escape the abyss. He became fluent in its language. And in doing so, he taught us all that the way out is not up, but down, through, and within.